of how we do that work, how those successes came about, and how a network of activists in 110 communities and 9 other countries, but not a huge number of people, have had a really major impact on funding and policy, and what in turn that's meant for the world. So results identifies problems that are fundamental causes and consequences of poverty, often issues that are being ignored because the people affected have very little voice, and because people in power often don't even know. Where huge life-saving, life-altering impact could be had if there were more attention and political support, and sometimes even just modest resources. Like getting every kid in the world in school, saving millions of lives by giving people access to treatment for tuberculosis and AIDS and other killers, helping tens of millions of women and their families around the world out of dire poverty through microloans, and making sure children in this country have access to quality preschool like Head Start and adequate nutrition so that they can start school ready to learn. We look at what would fundamentally transform these problems, and then we break it down into steps that policymakers can take. And our grassroots activists make the case directly to members of Congress and media and leverage progress. And it's really those grassroots activists that are the drivers of change that we've been able to create. When Results first started working on the issue of child survival in the late 1980s, so some really more than 3 decades ago, more than 14 million children were dying every year, 41,000 children a day, from mostly preventable diseases and malnutrition. And we began by calling attention to simple life-saving interventions like measles vaccination, costs less than $1, like oral rehydration therapy, the Pedialyte that you give to your kids when they have diarrhea, but in this case it actually prevented kids from dying. Antibiotics costing less than $1 to treat pneumonia. And we mobilized some of the first U.S. resources for UNICEF and for other programs to immunize kids and to put these programs forward in the world. And in the 1990s, we worked across the aisle in Congress, meeting with over 100 members of Congress, Republican, Democrat, and building a powerful bipartisan commitment to protecting and promoting child survival programs. And we convinced Congress successfully to create a special child survival account in the foreign aid budget that for the next decade and a half protected these programs even as other things were cut. And as we saw the funds go up, we also saw child deaths go down. And just last year, Results was one of the leading advocates for an international program called the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, Gavi. And with our advocacy work in the US, and along with partners that we have in the UK, Canada, Australia, Japan, we were instrumental in securing more than half of $4.3 billion in pledges from donor governments for Gavi. And that money is going to make 2 brand new vaccines against diarrhea and pneumonia, the biggest killers of kids on the planet, available for immunizing 250 million children between now and 2015. And that's going to save an estimated 4 million children's lives between now and the end of 2015. And that's, to kind of, sometimes those numbers just get big, but that's a child's life saved every 40 seconds. So overall, where have we come in the last 30 years? From over 14 million child deaths back in the late 1980s, that number has been cut in half to something like 7 million child deaths. From 40,000 deaths a day to something like 19,000. Now that's still way too much. It's unacceptable, but it's also enormous progress, even as total population has increased. And so from where we began almost 30 years ago, we are literally at the halfway point of ending preventable child deaths. And this past June, we participated in a meeting in Washington of global health leaders where people were talking about plotting the end of preventable child deaths on the planet. And Dr. Stark may say more about this in a moment as well. But what we learned in that meeting, and from the projections that were being made, is that if we stay on the course that we're on, we can actually achieve that goal of ending preventable child death in 55 years. But if we actually increase the resources, and it's modest increases for these things, increase the resources, increase the scale up, we can get there in less than 20 years. And I don't have a slide, so I'm going to kind of show you the difference between that curve of 55 years and that curve of 20 years. The space in there, it's not a graph, it's actually tens of millions of children's lives. And the progress that we make will be based on the political decisions that are made and the political priorities that's just given, and that's what Results has been working to drive. And just briefly, to end, I want to say a couple of the other issues that we've worked on and that you guys are familiar with, and one that we're working on right now with our grassroots groups around the country is access to education. And not only is access to education, especially for girls, the right of every child, but it is one of the biggest drivers of actually reducing child deaths on the planet. There's no better predictor of whether or not a child will be malnourished, whether or not a child will survive, than the education of their mother. And here in the U.S., the Results has worked hard for over 2 decades supporting programs like Head Start and Early Head Start so that kids can start school ready to learn, nutrition programs, health programs, because we know if we invest early the impact that that has. So I'd only end by saying we're at this sort of stunning moment of potential in the world where we can literally finish this job. But again, it's really going to be about political will and political capacity to get us to that endpoint. So in Results, we're excited about the fact that we right now are in 32 states and 200 congressional districts around the country, but we've set a goal of reaching all 50 states in the next 3 years and 2/3 of all congressional districts, because that's what we believe it will take to play our part in taking us over that goal line. And I just want to say I'm hugely grateful to all of you that are here for the support that you've given us to make that possible.